The candles in the ballroom of Ashcombe Park had burned low by the time anyone thought to look for Marianne Wren, and by then she was already gone, slipped out through the terrace doors with her worst gown clinging damp to her shoulders from the rain that had begun without warning an hour before. No one had noticed her leave. No one that season had ever quite managed to notice her arrive. She was 22, and she had worn the same grey silk to 4 balls running, because there was no money in the Wren household for anything finer, and because her stepmother had made it plain, in the particular gentle cruelty of women who smile while they wound, that new gowns were for daughters who might actually be married in them. Marianne's younger stepsister, Cecilia, had 3 new gowns that season alone. Marianne had a needle, a candle stub, and a habit of counting stars. She counted them now, from the low stone wall at the edge of the garden, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill, rain-damp hair coming loose from its pins. Behind her, laughter drifted out from the ballroom in gold ribbons of sound, and none of it was for her. "They will marry her off by June," she murmured to the sky, not truly meaning Cecilia, though she let the thought sit there a moment, softer and more dangerous. She meant herself, and the understanding, 3 months old now and never spoken aloud in the house, that she had been promised, quietly, distantly, on paper more than in feeling, to a man she had never met, a duke whose name her father invoked, the way other men invoked their creditors, with a kind of relief that the debt might finally be settled. "I do not even know his face," she told the stars, because the stars had never once judged her for speaking to them, "and he does not know mine. He will come, and he will see Cecilia in her blue silk, and he will wonder why he was ever fool enough to agree to marry the plain one instead." She said it lightly. She had trained herself, over 5 years of her father's second marriage, to say the true and painful things lightly, as though they could not touch her if she handed them to the air first. She did not know that fewer than 30 feet away, in the black shadow beneath the yew hedge, a man in a plain dark coat, no signet ring visible, no cravat pin, nothing to mark him as anything but a gentleman of modest means, had gone entirely still and was listening to every word. He had come outside to escape the crush of a ballroom he despised, in a house he had entered under a name that was not quite his own, for reasons that were his alone to keep that evening. He had meant to smoke a cigar and return before he was missed. Instead, he had heard a woman's voice, low and unguarded, confessing to the sky that she expected to be discarded before she had even been chosen, and something in him, something that had been asleep for a long time, guarded by duty, and by grief, and by the particular loneliness of men who are powerful and universally admired and known by almost no one, woke up. He did not step forward, not yet. He only watched her outline against the dark garden, the set of her shoulders, proud even in solitude, and thought, "Whoever you are wrong about what is coming." Her name, though she did not yet know his, was already turning over in his mind, like a coin he meant to keep. His name was Julian Ashworth, 7th Duke of Marchmoor, and he had arrived at Ashcombe Park 2 days before the ball under the borrowed identity of a Mr. Julian Ash, a friend of the family visiting on business. A small deception, but a necessary one. He had been promised, by contract his own father had signed a decade before his death, to the elder daughter of Baron Wren, sight unseen, in exchange for a debt that had once nearly ruined both houses. Julian had grown into his title with that contract folded quietly at the bottom of a strongbox, and he had told himself for years that when the time came, he would simply do his duty and marry whichever Wren daughter was presented to him, and that duty, if performed with decency, need not be unhappy. But he was a careful man, and a man who had learned, at great cost, not to trust what was presented to him at first appearance. So he had come early, and quietly, and unannounced as himself, to see the family as they truly were, before they knew a duke was watching. What he had seen, in 2 days, had not reassured him. Baroness Wren, the stepmother, spoke of her stepdaughter Marianne the way one might speak of an old piece of furniture, useful but unlovely, to be kept out of the good parlour when guests called. Cecilia, the true daughter of the house, was praised without cease, dressed without expense spared, spoken of as though her marriage to the Duke of Marchmoor were already a settled and celebrated thing, though no one in the house, save Baron Wren himself, knew which sister the contract actually named. Julian had watched Marianne Wren for 2 days before that night in the garden, and what he had watched was this. She rose before the rest of the household to see that the younger children, 2 half-brothers not yet in leading strings, were fed and dressed, though this was not, by any measure, her duty. She spoke gently to the servants, and more than once he had seen her carry her own tray back to the kitchen rather than trouble a maid already run off her feet. She had said, when her stepmother remarked cruelly at dinner that grey suited plain women best because it did not draw attention to their plainness, only, "Yes, mother, you are quite right," and passed the salt. He had thought, watching her fold that cruelty away without complaint, there is more steel in her than any of them know. And now, in the dark garden, he heard her speak to the stars of a duke who would surely prefer her prettier sister, and something in his chest tightened with an anger that surprised him, not at her, never at her, but at every person in that lit ballroom who had made a woman of such quiet dignity believe herself an afterthought. He stepped forward at last, deliberately loud upon the gravel path, so she would hear him coming and not be startled, the way a careful man announces himself to a wild thing he does not wish to frighten away. "You'll take a chill," he said, "sitting out here in the wet." Marianne turned, and even in the dark he saw her compose herself instantly, chin lifting, spine straightening, the practiced armor of a woman accustomed to being caught in unguarded moments and judged for them. "I did not realize the garden was occupied, sir." "Nor did I, until I heard someone speaking with a good deal more sense than anyone inside that ballroom." He inclined his head toward the golden windows. "I am escaping a crush of my own. Julian Ash, at your service, though I confess I did not mean to eavesdrop, and I apologize for it." "There is nothing to apologize for. I was only talking foolishness to the stars." She managed a small, wry smile. "It is a habit. My old governess used to say, a woman who cannot speak her true mind to a person had better find something honest to speak it to. That does not sound like foolishness to me." He came to stand near the wall, but not too near, a careful distance, respectful. "It sounded rather like the truest thing I've heard spoken in this house in 2 days. She studied him properly then, in the spill of light from a nearby window. A tall man, dark-haired, with a stillness to him that she associated, without quite knowing why, with men who were used to being obeyed and had grown tired of it. His coat was well made but unremarkable. Nothing about him announced wealth or rank, and yet there was something in the quiet authority of his bearing that made her wonder, briefly, whether Mr. Ash was the whole of his name. "You are a guest of my father's, I think," she said. "I do not recall seeing you at dinner." "I have kept to the edges of things," he said, which was true, and not the whole truth, and he felt the small dishonesty of the omission more sharply than he expected to. "I find I see a great deal more from the edges." That is a strange thing for a guest at a ball to say. "Perhaps I am a strange guest." A faint smile. "May I ask what a duke has done, that you should be so certain he will discard you before he has even met you?" Marianne's cheeks warmed, grateful for the dark. "You heard that too, then?" "I heard all of it. I promise you I will carry none of it back into that ballroom to be repeated over the card tables." She believed him, though she could not have said why. Something steady in his voice, some absence of the mockery she had learned to expect from strangers who caught her at her most unguarded. "It is not a secret, precisely, only not spoken of. My father made an arrangement years ago, with a duke's late father, that one of his daughters would marry the son when the time came. No one has ever told me plainly which daughter was named in that contract. My stepmother behaves as though it must be Cecilia, because Cecilia is beautiful and biddable and will not embarrass anyone. I have simply assumed the same." "And if it were you?" She laughed, a small, unhappy sound. Then I expect the Duke would take one look at me beside my sister and count himself unlucky in his father's choice of match. I do not say that from self-pity, sir, only from arithmetic. I have no dowry to speak of, no great beauty, no particular accomplishment beyond patience and plain sewing. Cecilia has all three, or near enough. A duke wants an ornament for his house and his table. I would make a poor one. Julian was quiet a moment, and in the quiet, Marianne felt, strangely, not the awkwardness of a silence unfilled, but something closer to being truly looked at, as though this stranger were weighing her words honestly, rather than waiting his turn to flatter or dismiss her. I think, he said at last, that you have been told for so long what you are not, that you have stopped noticing what you are. But I have only known you a quarter of an hour, and even I can see it. See what, precisely? That you rose at dawn to see 2 children fed who are not even truly your charge. That you carried your own tea tray to the kitchen last evening rather than trouble a maid you could see was exhausted. That you took your stepmother's cruelty at dinner and turned it into nothing more than a passed dish of salt, without flinching, without breaking. He watched her eyes widen slightly. I notice a great deal. From the edges, Miss Wren. You have been watching me, she said, half wondering, half wary. I have been watching this house, he corrected gently, and you were the only honest thing in it. The rain began again, lightly, and he offered his arm without ceremony to walk her back beneath the shelter of the terrace, and she took it, and neither of them said anything further of dukes or contracts that night, but something had shifted in the dark garden all the same, a small hinge turning, quiet and irreversible. He returned to the house the following morning as himself, and did not tell her so at once. For 9 days Mr. Ash lingered at Ashcombe Park, under the excuse of unfinished business with Baron Wren, and in those 9 days he and Marianne fell into a habit that neither named aloud, an hour before breakfast in the walled garden, where she went to see to the kitchen herbs and he went, ostensibly, to walk off a restless night. He learned that she read Latin better than her tutor had ever admitted to her father, that she had taught herself to mend a watch mechanism from a book because the household clock had broken and there had been no money to send it out, that she had wanted, once, before her mother died, to see the sea, and had never gone. She learned that he had lost his own father young and inherited responsibilities he had not asked for, that he distrusted flattery instinctively because he had been surrounded by it his whole life and had learned to hear the hollow note beneath it, that he preferred a garden before dawn to any ballroom in London. She did not learn his true name and did not think to press for it. There seemed no reason a Mr. Ash of modest means should lie to her about anything so simple, and she had, without quite realizing it, begun to trust him more than she trusted anyone else beneath that roof. Cecilia noticed him too, noticed, more precisely, that he seemed to seek out her plain sister's company over her own, and did not care for it. "You waste your morning walks on Marianne," she said one afternoon, not unkindly but with the careless confidence of a girl who had never once doubted her own worth, "when you might have mine. I promise you I am far better company." "I don't doubt it," Julian said, with perfect courtesy and not a flicker of interest, and Cecilia, unused to being so gently declined, went away frowning, and complained to her mother, who began, from that day, to watch Marianne with a new and colder attention. It came to a head on the 9th evening, at a smaller gathering in the drawing-room, when the Baroness, perhaps sensing that her daughter's position with the mysterious Mr. Ash was slipping, and perhaps simply because cruelty, once a habit, does not need much cause, remarked in front of the assembled guests that it was a pity Marianne's gown had been let out twice already, for she does grow so stout on kitchen scraps, being always underfoot there, and the room tittered, and Marianne's face went white, and then perfectly, terribly still. Julian, standing near the mantel, felt something cold settle over him, not the hot anger of a young man wounded on a woman's behalf, but the older, quieter fury of a man who has spent his life watching power abuse those who cannot answer it, and has promised himself he will never again stand silent while it happens in front of him. "Baroness," he said, and something in his voice made the room quiet at once, though he had not raised it. "I have eaten at your table 9 days, and in 9 days I have watched Miss Wren rise before any other soul in this house to see your own younger sons fed and dressed. I have watched her mend linens by candlelight that a woman of her position need not mend at all. I confess I do not understand how a household so well served by one daughter's labor can spare so little kindness for her in return." The silence that followed was absolute. Cecilia's fan stopped moving. The Baroness's smile did not so much fall as freeze, brittle, upon her face. "You forget yourself, sir," she managed. "You are a guest in this house, not a—" "I am a guest," Julian agreed. "And I have been, until this moment, a patient one." He crossed the room, unhurried, and came to stand beside Marianne, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him at her shoulder, a silent wall placed deliberately between her and the room's stairs. "But I find I have very little patience left for watching a good woman made small for other people's comfort." Marianne did not speak. She could not, just then. Her throat was too full of something she did not yet have a name for. Not only gratitude, though there was that, but the strange, dizzying sensation of being seen, entirely, by someone with the power to make the room see her too. Baron Wren, red-faced and floundering, tried to laugh the moment away as an excess of wine, and the gathering resumed its uneasy chatter, but nothing in that drawing-room was quite the same afterward, and Marianne understood, with a small shock that settled deep in her chest, that Mr. Ash, whoever he truly was, had just spent something of his own standing to defend her, publicly, without being asked. Later that night, in the corridor outside her room, she found him waiting, having clearly not cared whether it was proper to do so. "You did not have to do that," she said. "No," he agreed. "I wanted to. There is a difference, and I think it is one you have not been permitted to believe in for a long while. You have made an enemy of my stepmother. I had already made one of her, the moment I decided your company was worth more than her daughter's flattery." He studied her face in the low candlelight, the wariness in it, the exhaustion of long practice at swallowing insult, and beneath it, something he had come, in 9 days, to recognize as hope, trying very hard not to be hope. "Marianne, I must tell you something, and I ask that you hear the whole of it before you say anything at all." Her stomach dropped, some old instinct warning her that whatever came next would change the shape of things. "You are frightening me. I do not mean to." He drew a slow breath. "My name is not Ash. It is Ashworth, Julian Ashworth, Duke of Marchmoor." She went very still. "I came to this house under another name," he went on, quietly, watching her absorb it, "because I did not wish to meet the daughter I was promised to, as a duke meets a stranger, all performance, all calculation on both sides. I wished to see this family as they truly are, before anyone had reason to perform for me. I did not expect—" He stopped, and something almost unguarded crossed his face. "I did not expect to find, in the course of that deception, a woman I could not stop thinking of. I did not expect that woman to be the very one my father's contract named." "You knew," Marianne said, very carefully, the ground shifting beneath her, "from the beginning. You knew it was I, not Cecilia, who was promised to you." "I have known since the second morning, when your father confirmed it to me privately, believing I might withdraw from the arrangement once I had seen you both, and preferred your sister, as he plainly hoped I would." A muscle moved in his jaw. "He offered to substitute Cecilia in your place, if I wished it, and call it near enough to the letter of the contract that no one would object." The color drained from her face. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him," Julian said, low and certain, "that I had not come 9 days early, and worn a false name, and risked my own dignity in that drawing-room tonight, to be handed a substitute. I told him that if the contract named Marianne Wren, then it was Marianne Wren I intended to marry, not because a piece of paper obliges it, but because I have spent 9 mornings in a garden with a woman who mends clocks from books, and gives away her own comfort without being asked, and speaks more honestly to the stars than most people speak to their own hearts, and I find I do not wish to spend the rest of my life with anyone else." For a long moment Marianne could not speak at all. When she did, her voice was unsteady. "You cannot mean that. You are a duke. You could have any woman in England, beautiful, accomplished, dowered." "I have met a great many of those women," he said, "at a great many balls, and not one of them ever made me feel the way I felt, watching you fold your stepmother's cruelty into a past dish of salt without letting it break you. I do not want an ornament, Marianne. I have enough ornaments in my house already, gathering dust in gilt frames. I want a woman who will tell me the truth even when it costs her something. I have found, I think, only one of those in my whole life, and she is standing in front of me now, looking as though she does not quite believe I mean what I say." "I do not," she admitted, half laughing, half weeping, the events of the evening finally catching up to her all at once. The humiliation, the defense, the revelation, the confession, arriving in a single dizzying rush. "It is a great deal to believe, all in one night." "Then believe only this much tonight," he said gently, "and let me prove the rest of it in the mornings to come, for as many mornings as you will give me. I am not offering you a contract fulfilled out of duty, Marianne. I am offering you a choice, freely made, by a man who noticed you when no one else thought to look." The days that followed were not, as fairy stories like to promise, entirely without difficulty. The Baroness, stripped of her plan to elevate Cecilia into a duchess, grew colder still, and made it plain in a dozen small ways, a missed invitation here, a cutting remark there, that she considered Marianne's rise an injustice to be quietly resented rather than celebrated. Cecilia, to her credit, took the news with more grace than her mother, though it cost her some private tears Marianne only later learned of, and the two sisters found, in the strange redistricting of the household's fortunes, a tentative honesty between them that had never existed before, born less of triumph than of shared understanding. Both of them had spent years being weighed against each other for other people's approval, and neither of them had chosen that scale. Baron Wren, for his part, was simply relieved the contract would be honoured at all, and troubled himself little further with which daughter honoured it. It was Julian who insisted, when the betrothal was formally announced, that it be announced properly, not as the quiet settling of an old family debt, which was how such contracted matches were usually spoken of in drawing rooms up and down the country, but as a match of his own choosing, spoken aloud, without apology, at the same assembly rooms where Marianne had once slipped unnoticed through a terrace door in a damp grey gown. She wore blue that night, not because Cecilia had once worn blue and been admired for it, but because Julian had asked her, quietly, what colour she had always wanted and never been given, and she had confessed, half embarrassed, that she had always loved the deep blue of a clear night sky, the kind she used to count stars against. He had sent for the silk himself. When they entered the ballroom together, the Duke of Marchmoor and the woman he had chosen, not the substitute anyone had expected, not the ornament anyone would have predicted, but Marianne Wren exactly as she was, the room did not titter. The room, for once, fell into an entirely different kind of silence. The silence of people recalculating, all at once, everything they had assumed about a plain girl in a grey gown. Julian led her to the centre of the floor, in full view of everyone who had ever overlooked her, and before the first dance began, he bent his head close to hers and said, quiet enough that it was only for her, "Do you remember what you told the stars, that first night in the garden?" "That he would surely prefer my sister," she murmured, cheeks warm. "You were wrong about that," Julian said, "and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving how wrong, one ordinary morning at a time, until you no longer need the stars to hear the truth of what you are worth. You need only look at me." She laughed then, a real laugh, unguarded, and it drew eyes from every corner of the room, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Marianne Wren did not mind in the least being seen. They were married in early spring, at the small stone chapel on the Marchmoor estate, rather than in London, because Julian had asked her, privately, what sort of wedding she had ever let herself imagine, and she had confessed She had never let herself imagine one at all, not truly, having long ago decided that dreaming of it only made the disappointment sharper when it did not come. So he had built the day instead around the things she loved, without knowing she was permitted to love them aloud. A chapel filled with late snowdrops instead of hothouse roses, a small gathering instead of a fashionable crush, and at his particular and unshakable insistence, a ceremony held in the late evening, so that when they stepped outside afterward, as husband and wife, the first thing Marianne saw was the sky, clear and bright with stars, exactly as she had always loved it. "I thought," Julian said, drawing her hand through his arm as they walked the garden path together, unhurried, "that you ought to have someone to share the counting with, from now on." "I have been counting them alone a long time," she admitted, tipping her face up to the dark. "I am not entirely certain I know how to do it any other way." "Then we shall learn together." He stopped, turning her gently to face him, and in the starlight his usual composure had softened into something unguarded and entirely hers. "You told them, that first night, that you did not think a duke could ever choose you over anyone finer. I have spent every day since trying to make certain you never doubt it again, but I find I would like to say it once more, properly, in case the stars did not carry it far enough the first time. Say it then. I choose you, Marianne. Not the contract, not the arrangement, not the daughter anyone expected me to prefer. You, exactly as you are, in your worst gown or your best, mending clocks and giving away your comfort, and speaking honest things to the sky when you think no one is listening. I have never in my life wanted anything so plainly, or so entirely, as I want to spend the whole of my life proving I was listening and that what I heard was worth everything." Marianne, who had spent so many years learning to make herself small enough not to be noticed, found she had no wish left to hide from being seen, not by the ballroom, not by her stepmother, not by anyone, only by him, and only because there was, at last, nothing left in her that needed hiding. "I love you," she said simply, the words arriving without the armor she had once wrapped around every honest thing she felt. "And I think I have loved you since a stranger in a plain coat told me, in the dark, that I had been wrong about everything I believed myself to be worth." "Then we are agreed," Julian said, and kissed her beneath the same stars she had once whispered her loneliest hopes to, "that neither of us shall ever let the other forget it again." Above them, the sky held its usual quiet multitude of stars, indifferent as ever to the small dramas of the house below. But Marianne, held safe in the circle of her husband's arms for the first time, not as a burden set aside, nor a substitute overlooked, but as the woman a duke had crossed every barrier of rank and pride to choose, thought that perhaps, for the first time in her life, she did not need the stars to listen to her secrets at all. She had found, at last, someone who had been listening all along. The house they returned to that night was not merely grander than any she had known before, though it was that too. High ceilings, long galleries hung with portraits of Ashworths, who had never once imagined a wife chosen for love rather than lineage. Gardens that stretched further than the eye could follow in the dark. It was, more than anything, the first house in Marianne's life that felt entirely hers to belong in, without qualification, without the quiet daily arithmetic of earning her place at the table. In the weeks that followed, she came to know it slowly, the way one comes to know a person rather than a place. The drafty corner of the library where Julian liked to read before dawn. The housekeeper who wept, quietly and without explanation. The first time Marianne thanked her by name for a task most mistresses would never have noticed was done at all. She came to know the servants not as a class to be managed, but as people, the way she always had, and found that this too was not a strangeness to be corrected out of her, but a grace Julian had married her precisely because he valued. "You need not change a single thing about how you move through a room," he told her once, watching her kneel without a thought to her skirts, to help a young under-housemaid gather a dropped tray of china, to suit a title. "I did not marry a duchess. I married you, and it happens that you are now also a duchess, which is a very different thing, and very much the better bargain, as far as I am concerned. Cecilia visited that summer, alone, without her mother, and the two sisters walked the long gravel paths of the Marchmoor gardens for hours, speaking honestly for what both later agreed was the first time in their lives, not as rivals measured against each other by a woman who had needed them to compete in order to feel her own household secure, but as two young women who had both, in their different ways, been taught to doubt their own worth by the very people meant to protect it. "I used to think you resented me," Cecilia admitted, twisting a ribbon between her fingers. "For the gowns, for Mother's favor." "I did not resent you," Marianne said gently. "I only wished, sometimes, that there had been enough kindness in the house to go around both of us, instead of only ever being handed to one at the other's expense." "There is enough here," Cecilia said, glancing up at the great house behind them, its windows catching the last gold of the afternoon. "I have never seen you look so entirely at ease anywhere in your life." "I have never been anywhere I was so entirely wanted," Marianne answered, and found, saying it, that the old ache she had carried for so long, the quiet certainty that she would always be the daughter chosen last, if chosen at all, had, at some point she could not precisely name, simply ceased to live inside her. That autumn, when the first frost silvered the garden, and the stars hung especially bright and close over Marchmoor, Julian found his wife exactly where he had first learned to look for her, seated on a low stone wall at the garden's edge, face tipped up to the sky, though this time she was not alone with her whispered hopes, and this time there was no damp grey gown, no stepmother's cruelty waiting for her indoors, no uncertainty about whether anyone in the house above thought her worth noticing at all. "Counting again?" he asked, settling beside her, drawing her cloak more snugly about her shoulders against the cold with the same unhurried care he had shown her from the very first night. "Only remembering," she said. "I used to come out to places like this and tell the stars all the things I was too afraid to say aloud to anyone who might actually answer. I think some small, foolish part of me believed no one was ever truly listening." "Someone was," Julian said, and drew her hand to his lips. "Someone has been listening since the very first night, and intends to go on listening for the whole of both our lives, however long the stars care to grant us." Marianne laughed softly, leaning into the warmth of him, the ache of all those lonely, overlooked years, finally, fully quieted. "Then I suppose," she said, "I no longer need to whisper at all." "No," Julian agreed, holding her close beneath the vast and patient sky that had once been her only confidant, and was now simply the ceiling over a life she had never quite dared to hope for. "You may say it as loudly as you like, from now on. I will always be near enough to hear it." And beneath that same wide sky, in the quiet, settled peace of a love that had begun with a stranger overhearing a whispered doubt, and ended with a duke choosing, decisively and entirely, the woman everyone else had overlooked, Marianne Wren, Marianne Ashworth, Duchess of Marchmoor, finally, fully belonged